to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. I'm your podcast host, Landon Blake, a land surveyor living and working in Central California. Happy to have you here. Let's go ahead and dive right into today's episode. The title of this episode is Finding Good Clients, Qualifying Leads, and Controlling Proposal Costs. It sounds boring. Maybe it is a little boring, but it is important, especially if you run a small business. This is another episode in the series of episodes that we're running on the podcast about finding good clients. This might be the third or the fourth episode in that series. I can't remember, but somewhere in there. So it's another episode on that theme. Kind of excited. We're going to do another handful of episodes on another theme that we're going to call the human element, about managing the people part of a small surveying and mapping business. So I think the first episode on that will be coming out, might be the next episode. So look forward to that. We won't do those as frequently as we're doing the episodes for this series on finding good clients, but we'll do them every, once a month. We'll probably do one of those episodes on the human element. So this is another installment about finding good clients. We talk a lot about that. We've been talking a lot about that the last several weeks because it's important. It's one of the most important things you can do as an owner of a small surveying business. Quick disclaimer here. A couple things, couple quick disclaimers. And I don't know. I don't know if I say this in the beginning of every episode or not, but I probably should. Hey, I don't know that I am an expert at what we're going to talk about today, and I don't know that I have it all figured out. I think I have gotten a lot better at it over the last 5 years, and I think I continue to get better at it, but I know I have room to improve, and I'm not saying I have all the answers. I probably still spend too much time on proposals, despite my best efforts. I got a sticky note on my monitor right here. A couple months ago, I gave somebody a proposal for a Alta survey in downtown Stockton, and I'm usually pretty choosy about who I'll do an Alta survey proposal for because it's a highly competitive market and a lot of surveyors cut corners on those. But this was in our backyard, and the gentleman was in a hurry, and so I thought I had a decent shot at it. And wasted my time putting together that proposal. I think my price was, $12,000, which is pretty. It's on the low end of us for an Alta, and I think the surveyor that got the survey, I think, was like $1,200 or something crazy. See, I'm still messing that up. I never should have given that guy a proposal. All he was worried about was the cheapest price, and I knew that wasn't going to be me. So I'm still learning I'm learning to get better at this. All right, the other disclaimer is I'm still working on my word whiskers. Obviously, I just let a so slip. So is my favorite word in the entire universe. I'm working on not saying that as much. I'm also trying not to say or or like or It's a really hard habit to break. Be patient with me, please. You may hear me hesitate a little bit as I struggle to not utter a word whisker. I'd like to start this episode with a story. This story is from it's from a job I had at a large civil survey company here in California. At the time, I wasn't a bigwig at this particular outfit, so I was a project surveyor. I managed a small team. I don't know, maybe a half a dozen people or 8 people, but I didn't do a ton of business development. My boss took care of most of that. I did a little bit, but I didn't do a ton, which was a change for me. Because the previous job I had done, that was almost all I did. So this was a little more of a technical role. I can't remember why. For some reason, I got looped in on a business development opportunity that our team was working on. My boss was involved with it. And the opportunity was to get on an on-call list with one of our county governments here in the California Central Valley. And the on-call list was for surveying services to support road projects, so design of road improvements. So that included things like topographic surveying, utility mapping, right-of-way mapping, preparing land description packages when they needed to do acquisitions. And I had a lot of experience with that type of work for my first job, so they brought me in on that. They brought me in on that opportunity. And so for people that are listening to the, I think I just said it, so for people that are listening to the episode that don't understand what an on-call list is, or sometimes you hear it called a short list, that's where an agency will put together a list of, quote, pre-qualified, unquote, consultants. And it's usually for a period of 1 to 3 years. It can go, sometimes they go 5 years. And then the agency will issue RFPs to, typically they will only issue RFPs to companies that are already on the pre-qualified list. One of the, it's not a bad thing, but one of the problems that we have here in California where we are required to use qualifications-based selection is agencies, local government agencies tend to use this to get around qualifications-based selections. So they'll put together a pre-qual list, and then they will basically make people on the pre-qual list bid against each other to get the specific projects. We call that, instead of qualifications-based selection, we call it qualifications-based bidding, which is not a good way to select consultants for your infrastructure projects, but a lot of government agencies in California do that. There are some agencies that do it the right way, but a lot of them do it the wrong way. So anyways, that's what a non-call list is, or a short list. So this was to get on a on-call list for one of our local counties. Now there were some important things to know about this particular opportunity, and this was in what they call the RFQ, the request for qualifications. So the total contract value over the 3-year period was $100,000. That meant, best case scenario, they weren't going to issue you more than $100,000 worth of work. Now, $100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but for this particular company, that was not a lot of money. They were, I don't know, we were 500 people or 600 people at the time, the company was. And they did big projects. So $100,000 wasn't a lot of work for them. And even for RH, we're 15 people now, I think. I would not get super excited about a $100,000 on-call contract over 3 years. It's not a lot of money. So even if you max out the contract value, which you almost never do, that's only $35,000 a year. We can do, a couple boundary surveys. We're doing a $35,000 worth of work here in California, and we do that 2 or 3 times a month. So it just wasn't a lot of money. There just wasn't a lot of money there. And in order to get selected for the on-call list, you had to put together a pretty detailed, what they call statement of qualifications, or SOQ. So if you've done that kind of business development before, you know what I'm talking about. Resumes for key staff, information about the bandwidth and availability of key staff and their commitments, profile or resume for the company, list of projects completed in the last 5 years, information about any lawsuits or settlements you'd been in, on and on and on and on and on. It's a lot of work to put these things together. And then if you made it through the first step of the selection process, so after the county reviewed your packet, then you still had to go in for an in-person interview. And in the RFQ, they let you know that the county was under no commitment to issue task orders as part of the 3-year on-call contract. So they could put you under on-call contract, and you might not get any of the work, and they might not issue any work to any of the consultants on the on-call list, which is that's not unusual. That's pretty typical language in an RFQ. So let's take a minute and just do some napkin math with me and talk about why it was a foolish idea for my employer at the time to go after this on-call opportunity. So we have $100,000 total contract value. Let's say best case scenario, you were hoping to make a 30% profit on that work, which is, I think it's way too aggressive. For that kind of work, I think you're probably closer to 15%. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they can make a 30% profit margin. Okay, so $100,000 on call. If you maxed out the contract value, the most profit you could make is $30,000 on that on-call contract. That's over a 3-year period, which means your maximum amount of profit per year for that 3-year period is 10 grand. And that's best case scenario. I don't know if I've ever had an on-call contract where we've maxed out the contract value. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it rarely happens. And so there's my company spent a ton of money on this SOQ, this statement of qualifications. So bunch of admin time. There's another bunch of admin time, bunch of my time, bunch of my boss's time, bunch of my boss's boss's time. And we put together a nice package and we got selected for an interview. Then they spent a bunch of time preparing for the interview. So we had a couple in-person meetings to prepare for the interview. I think there was 8 to 10 people there. Then we actually traveled to the county to do the in-person interview. We made it through the interview process and we got put on the on-call list. So that's great. That's fantastic, right? So you're thinking, maybe you're thinking, well, why was it a foolish decision? They made it through the selection process. Every company that submitted an SOQ made it through the selection process, which basically means there was really no selection process. Any company that submitted an SOQ got put on the list. And that's not uncommon when a local government agency is going to do qualifications-based bidding. They want as many people on the list as they can get because they want to pit the companies on the on-call list against each other so they can get the lowest possible price. So everybody that submitted got on the on-call list, and over that 3-year period, we did not get one single task order from that agency. And part of the reason why that happened is because we weren't a good fit. We were too big and we were too expensive for this. This was a county in a poor part of California. We were too big and we were too expensive. This company was in the Bay Area that I worked for. And we had no business going after that SOQ. If you do the math, I've sketched it out. If you do the math, I think we spent $40,000 to get through that selection process on that particular opportunity. The most profit we were going to make in the best case scenario, maxing out the contract value, was 30 grand. So at the time we got put on the on-call list, the best case scenario was that we were going to lose 10 grand. That was foolish. We should have never gone after that opportunity. Now, why does that happen? I've asked myself that because I've seen that happen, and it seems to happen more at big companies than it does at small companies. And I don't have an answer for that. I think part of why that might happen, we could maybe do a PYBO team extra about this, talk about it some more. But I think it happens because the people that are rewarded for winning on-call opportunities are not then also evaluated on how actual performance on the on-call contract is. In other words, they aren't evaluated and rewarded based on how much revenue comes through the on-call contract and how profitable that revenue is, those are the metrics that really matter, guys. Getting on the on-call contract, hey, you can pat yourself on the back and give yourself a few little brownie points for that, but that's not what matters. What matters is how much revenue comes out of the on-call contract and what is the profit margin on that revenue. And I'm not saying there aren't any other considerations. Sometimes you try and get on an on-call list because you want to build a long-term relationship with a client or because you need certain type of experience on your company resume. There may be other reasons to do it, but most of the time what really matters is how much revenue and what's the profit margin on that revenue. And I think what happens at big companies is the people that are evaluated, business development people and managers in positions where managers who are responsible for sales and marketing they score brownie points for winning slots on call contracts that don't ultimately benefit the company, and in fact, oftentimes lose the company money. It's just a bad incentive structure, and that's a problem in large organizations. So I think this was an example of that. The business development lead at this company, I think, had that incentive problem. She got rewarded for just, she liked to get on our internal company chat and crow about all the opportunities she had helped win. And I don't think her incentives were properly aligned for the metrics that really mattered, which was the revenue and the profit margin on those opportunities that were being won. So I think ego also plays a role there. I think it was her ego, it was my boss's ego, it was my boss's ego. They wanted to go to the corporate lunch that Thursday and tell everybody, oh, hey, we won this new on-call contract with this new client. But it wasn't going to be a profitable opportunity out of the gate. And you didn't need a crystal ball to figure that out. You could have done some napkin math and figured that out. So that the reason I tell you that story is it helps, I hope, illustrate why this is so important, why qualifying leads and controlling your proposal costs is so important. You can spend a lot of good money on bad opportunities if you're not careful. When I say proposal costs here, I'm talking about actual proposals and what we would call statements of qualifications to get on an on-call list. So for the rest of the proposal, when you hear me say proposal, it's proposals and statements of qualifications. Why is this important? Why is it important to qualify leads and control your proposal costs? So I've got a few different reasons why that's important. The first is the world is full of tire kickers and coupon shoppers. And the internet has made this worse because it's much easier now for people to find you, and the internet has taught people that they should get a coupon price for everything they buy. So the internet has done a lot of good things. I've mentioned that before on the podcast, but it has made this problem worse, I think. And so you get people that aren't serious about paying a reasonable price for professional services provided by a land surveyor. They're tire kicking. They're trying to find the best deal they can. And you need to weed those people out. You don't want to waste time preparing proposals for them. Another thing I've learned the hard way the last 4 or 5 years in business is many potential clients will try and extract the maximum value they can from you without paying. And typically that comes in the form of free consulting advice. I had a note here to give you a couple examples. I'm trying to think of a good example. I had a friend. I don't know if I'd call him a friend. He's an acquaintance. I think we could be friends at some point. He called me. He had a client in Southern California with an interesting project. It was a pretty big project. They were doing some development work on a big commercial real estate parcel in Los Angeles. And he didn't have the required expertise for certain elements of this project. And so we had talked before, and he knew me from LinkedIn, and he reached out to me and my business partner Brian about joining his team to help him get this work done. And I started asking, I told him, sure, we're willing to have a conversation. We talked to him a couple times about the project. It was a big project. There was enough money in it there for us, I thought, but we started asking him some questions, and I started drilling down a little bit. He'd never worked for this client before. The client was a general contractor, which is, they tend not to be great clients. They operate in a low bid, kind of cutthroat environment. They didn't really understand the expertise that we brought to the project, and I'm not sure they valued it. It became clear in some conversations we were having that they were looking for the cheapest possible way to get this work done. They weren't as interested in doing it the right way. They were more interested in just getting it done for as cheaply as possible. This was a high dollar, high liability development project, and so that scared me a little bit. There's a so. I apologize. We ended up spending more time than we should have helping this acquaintance develop an approach for both his part of the work and our survey and mapping part of it. And it was more time than I should have spent. In hindsight, we were trying to build a relationship. And I don't know that it was the wrong decision. But we spent a lot of time basically giving free consulting advice to this acquaintance and his client. And at some point, my partner and I were starting to get a little skeptical that this was going to be a real opportunity for us. And what kind of sealed the deal, the nail in the coffin, was the acquaintance called and asked me if I would physically drive to LA and walk the project site with him and with his client and talk about the approach and ways we could potentially cut costs. And I know he didn't mean anything malicious by it, and he probably hadn't thought about it, but it was a big ask. So LA is a long drive. It's a long ways from here, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours, depending on traffic. So it's a day down, a night there, probably the whole day there, another night there, and a day back. I don't know, it was $6,000 worth of my time, maybe more. And we probably already put $6,000 of time into this. So now I've got a potential client that was asking me to put in $12,000 of free consulting advice to get this work. And I know we didn't have, the total project cost wasn't $100,000. So there probably wasn't $12,000 of profit in the project. And so I talked to my partner, Brian, and I had to tell the acquaintance, I'm sorry, I'm not going to make the trip to LA. I told him, if we get under contract to do the survey, then I'll come down and walk the site and we can help you guys fine-tune the scope of services. But I need a commitment and a signed contract and a deposit, by the way. I wasn't going to do that without a deposit. And when we told the acquaintance that, their client quickly got cold feet and backed out. So that was the right move, right? That told me that it was time to stop giving these people free advice, because they were vampires. They were sucking all the free advice they could get out of us, and they were probably never gonna pay us $1. And the world is full of people like that. For a small business, proposal preparation can be a huge cost. That's another reason why this is important. That's my third reason. I don't know how much of what percentage of my week I spend on, I'm not talking about marketing now, I'm just talking about business development, preparing, qualifying leads and preparing proposals, getting people under contract. Man, I don't know. I want to say it might be 20%. Might be 20% of my week. That's a huge amount. That's one day out of a 5-day week. And it might be more. It might be 1 to 2 days a week. It's a huge amount of my time. And so it's really important that you're getting your bang for your buck there. And if we weren't careful, we've gotten better at this. We've gotten more careful. If you're not careful, it could be 3 or 4 days of your time. I occasionally will let people know that we're going to charge them for an initial consultation and preparation of a proposal. We might talk about that a little bit later. People freak out. They freak out and they get upset and they get angry. And I have to tell them, I have to charge for this initial consultation and some of these proposals, because if I don't, I would only ever do proposals and I would never have time for the technical work, and at some point I would go bankrupt. So it will bleed your business dry if you're not careful. That's part of the reason why it's important. It can be a huge cost. The other thing that's important about this, I think, is if you're doing this right, if you're really working with the client to figure out what their needs are, call that needs discovery, and you're developing a good project approach and a good scope of services, and you're properly vetting your contract language. This needs to be done by a high value person in your survey and mapping organization. It can't be done by tech, and it can't be done by a marketing person. It has to be done by a business and domain expert. So I don't know. We're going to talk a little bit later about how you can try and reduce some of your proposal costs and be more productive, but there's no way to do good proposals, good business development and proposals and lead qualification without some high value staff time. That's all there is to it. So it's expensive. There's a so. It's expensive. There's just no way around that. The other thing I want you to remember, this is my fourth reason why it's important, is there are opportunity costs to preparing proposals. If you are spending too much time qualifying leads and preparing proposals for poorly qualified leads, you're not going to have time for other important things. For example, good marketing efforts to generate qualified leads. So it can turn it, there's a so. It can turn into a death spiral if you're not careful. Don't let that happen. If you spend too much time preparing proposals for the wrong potential clients, you are not going to have enough time to do the other important things in your business, like preparing proposals for the right type of client. What are we talking about today in the episode? Now that we've kind of, I gave you that opening story, we talked about why it's important, so what are we going to talk about? Let's see, I got 6 main points. We're going to count them down. Number 1, we're going to talk about mistakes I made early in the business, qualifying leads and preparing proposals. 2, we're going to talk about factors that contribute to the cost of proposals. I have 6, I think. In other words, what are you spending your money on when you prepare proposals? 3, we're going to talk about some suggestions on how to reduce your proposal costs. 4, we talk about how do you demonstrate expertise and build trust with potential clients without giving away all your advice for free, because that's important. So I've got a separate, a little section of the episode on that. And then let's see here. Finally, we're going to talk about how you can use some analytics in your business to make sure that you're not burning too much of your money qualifying leads and preparing proposals. I think that's more important as your business grows. We could do a better job of that here. We don't do super detailed analytics on our proposal costs, and that's partly because the business is small and Brian and I have a really good feel for that already, that number. We have our finger on that pulse. But I think as we get larger, that will become more difficult, especially as I'm just now starting to train other employees to do business development and prepare proposals, and it's going to get more important for us to start tracking those metrics. So we're going to talk about those analytics and how you might set them up. All right. Now that we made it through that, let's take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsor. When we come back, I'm going to talk about some mistakes I made early on in the business qualifying leads and proposals. Would you like to manage your land surveying or civil engineering data in a GIS? Do you work for a small organization or utility company? Have people told you that there isn't a way to get started with GIS for your data unless you have a $3 million budget and a dedicated ArcGIS server in your basement? That just isn't true. You can get started with GIS for a few $1,000s using QGIS and the expert consulting advice from the team at Redefine Horizons. We've been using open source software like QGIS to manage land surveying and civil engineering data for over 20 years. Call us to see just how easy it is to start. We can help you do an initial GIS needs assessment for your organization and introduce you to QGIS on the desktop for no charge. You can find our team on the web at www.rh-survey.com. We heard from our sponsor. Now we're going to jump back into that next part of the episode. This is about mistakes I made early on when RH was a young business. I made a lot of mistakes, but the mistakes we're going to talk about in this part of the episode are the mistakes I made when I was trying to qualify leads and when I was preparing proposals. There are 2 basic mistakes that I made in this area or arena. Well, the first mistake is I would give people way too much free advice. I believe I've gotten much better about not doing this. It's one of the things that I am probably most improved on as a business owner. So I am somewhat proud of that. I think I give out way less free advice. Now you may if you don't own your own business yet, that may sound stingy. Like, well, Landon, you're a stingy person. You want to help people when they call. And I've had other surveyors react that way when I talk about this. But it's not stingy. It's about being a good business person, and it's about asking people to respect your time and your value. And we can talk a little bit about a rule of thumb that I use that I think is a reasonable rule of thumb. But I would give people way too much free advice, and I don't do that anymore. So I've got a couple examples of the kind of free advice that I would give, and I don't do this anymore. So here's the first example. Here's the first example. I had a potential client. He was a land developer from Texas. He was interested in buying some land we had up in the coastal range outside of a little town called Patterson here in Central California. And he contacted me, found us on the web, contacted me about that, told me his idea for a subdivision. Did a quick check of the zoning. He was able to subdivide under the current zoning. This guy he was super friendly. He seemed serious. I did a ton of work for that guy. This is a few years ago. Like, I did a detailed review of the zoning regulations. I fiddle-farted around helping him with a potential lot layout. I answered a bunch of his questions about the subdivision process in California, what kind of conditions of approval he could expect. And then, towards the end of this process, he actually asked me if I would drive out and meet him in Patterson and get lunch and then go look at this parcel. And I declined to do that. I said, I'm not going to. That's a really good that's a great red flag that you've got somebody that's trying to extract maximum value from you, like a vampire. When they ask you to make an in-person visit like that and you're not under contract yet, they haven't given you any money. So I told him I'm not going to do that, and the guy ended up disappearing. I never heard from him again. I think part of that was just he was from Texas and he wasn't prepared for a lot of the hoops that you have to jump through to do California land development. But in hindsight, I spent way too much time with him. I should have charged him for all of that work that I did. He could have paid us to research the zoning regs and prepare a zoning report. He could have paid me for a preliminary lot layout and a site walk, and I didn't know enough at that point. One of my flaws as an early business owner was I expected people to reciprocate generosity with generosity, and I realize now that just doesn't happen 95% of the time. So you have to be careful as a business owner. Second example, we have an on-call contract for a local utility, and our contact there in the engineering department is a great guy. I like him. We've been friends. We're not good friends, but we've been friends for a long time, and I like him. I respect him. I think he's a good person, and he's a competent professional, and I think he tries to do a good job for his utility where he works. But they have this somewhat irritating habit of asking us once a year. They ask us for 2 or 3 proposals on major infrastructure projects, and they almost never execute contracts on those and it's not that other consultants get that work, because we have gotten 1 or 2 projects for them. It's not that other consultants get the work. I think they like us as a consultant. It's because they don't fund the projects. Their engineering department has way bigger ambitions than they have budgets, and so they're regularly asking us to prepare fairly detailed proposals for infrastructure projects that just never happen. And we haven't done this yet, but I'm seriously thinking about, it may be time for me to just stop doing that. And it may be, I don't know if we'll stop giving them any information at all, but I may just, I don't know what we're going to do. I may just have to tell that person in the engineering department, let me know what your budget is and I'll tell you if it's realistic. You can give me a ballpark budget. Or I might tell them, hey, here's a ballpark cost based on a 5-minute conversation. I really don't want to prepare a proposal unless you think you have that kind of money. So I'm a little frustrated. I've been a little frustrated there, but so that's an example. That's another example. We've had a relationship with that particular utility for 2 or 3 years now. And in the beginning, whenever they called, we would just spend a bunch of time preparing proposals. And I'm getting to the point now where I realize I have to stop doing that. Even though they've been a good client in the past and I have a relationship with the person in the engineering department and I like them, I consider them to be a friend and a good person and a competent professional, they don't typically have the money to do the projects they would like to do. And at some point, they waste a lot of our time preparing proposals that never turn into contracts. So those are a couple examples. So that's just to review, the first mistake I made was I would just give people way too much free advice. And we haven't talked about this yet in the episode, but I want to let you know, providing a good proposal with a cost estimate and a scope of services, that is consulting. That is free advice that you are giving. Not everybody can do that. That is part of why people come to you and hire you, is because you know what is needed to accomplish a project goal, and you can go through the needs discovery process and come up with a cost-effective approach that properly manages risk and liability and meets the client's goals. That has real value. And over and over and over again, surveyors give that away. And I did a ton of that the first couple of years running the business at RH. And I just don't do it as much anymore. And I'm doing it less and less as I become a more experienced business owner. What is the second mistake I made in this area or arena? The second mistake I made was I prepared way too many proposals for unqualified leads. So the first mistake was just giving people too much free advice. The second mistake was actually preparing proposals for people that weren't qualified leads. And I meant to talk, I wanted to talk for a few minutes about how you qualify leads and what is a qualified lead versus an unqualified lead, and a cold lead versus a warm lead. I don't know that I'm going to have time to do that. I didn't make it into the outline, but it is important. So we'll either do it as an extra, or I'm going to end up breaking this episode into two parts. I'll try and make time to do it in the second part of the episode. So I prepared too many proposals for unqualified leads. So those are different mistakes, and I want to clarify that. So the first mistake is just giving people free advice. That's before you even do a proposal. And the reason I did that was because I was trying to demonstrate to people, potential clients, that I knew what I was talking about, and that it was an effort on my part to sell value and expertise. And so I would just give away a lot of free advice before I was under contract. This other mistake, the second mistake, is different. That's where not only have you probably provided some initial advice, but now you've gone through the needs discovery process and you've actually prepared a scope and a fee estimate and the other proposal documents. So I did that too often. I wouldn't determine if the client had realistic funding for the project and my professional services. We talked a little bit about that with the utility company. And I see this a lot, and we do a fair amount of smaller land development projects. And we're typically dealing with people that aren't sophisticated land developers. That's one of the market niches that we serve, and it has challenges. One of the big challenges in that particular market is I deal with people that have no idea what it's going to cost to get through the land development process in California. And what I've learned is I have to go out of my way to really educate people about that early on in the lead qualification process, because one of the worst things you can do is get under contract with a client that does not have the money to finish their project, because inevitably they're going to be upset about that and they're going to pressure you to do free work. And it's just not a good position. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the client. So apologize. I didn't do a good job of making sure that my clients understood how much money they needed to get through the land development process and that they actually had access to that money. Now, look, clients can lie to you, and that's happened to us. I've told clients, look, you need $30,000 or $40,000 or $100,000 to get through this development. And I've had clients tell me, oh, don't worry, I have the money. And then we get into the project and they say, oh, we don't have the money. And it's not all. So sometimes people lie about that. Sometimes people don't lie. Sometimes the economy changes, and a client that had the money or thought they were going to have the money, by the time they're partway through that land development project, they don't have the money anymore. And that's just one of the risks of land development is it takes time, and the economy and the real estate market can move on you. The other thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't determine if the client had a sense of urgency. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about cold leads and hot leads, but I've learned the hard way that if people don't have a sense of urgency, they are going to price shop until their eyeballs bleed. That's one of the reasons why I don't do fence surveys. Now we try and determine if the client has a sense of urgency. The other common mistake I made was I didn't determine if I was talking to the real decision maker at the client. Sometimes you're dealing with an underling that doesn't actually have the authority to execute contracts. I don't do that anymore. You know, a lot of times when this happens on Alta surveys a lot, you're dealing with the paralegal or the real estate broker, and they're not the one that ultimately has the decision to make the authority. They don't have the authority to actually get you under contract. And so what I've learned to do now is just not deal with those people and tell them I need to talk to the decision maker. And if they don't want to do that, a lot of times I won't prepare the proposal, because I've learned the hard way that you're wasting time if you're not talking to the real decision maker. And just as a side note, when I am putting other people under contract to do work for us, professional work or non-professional work, I make sure that they get to deal with me as the decision maker. I don't have them deal with my administrative assistant or my CAD tech for that same reason. Trying to treat people the way I want to be treated. And the other thing that I didn't do a good job of is I would try to help clients who are only interested in buying a work product and not a professional service. We're going to try and do a whole episode on that. But if you get, you get these people that call up and say, they say, all I need is a topo survey, or all I need is an elevation certificate. And I tell those potential clients, I know that's what you think you need, but it may not be at all what you need. The way we need to do this is you need to tell me what end goal you're trying to accomplish, and I will help tailor a scope of services to meet your needs. A lot of clients don't want that. They're like, no, I know better than you. All I need is X. Just give me a price for X. And I've learned the hard way, don't waste time with those people. They're just trying to buy a product. They're not trying to buy a professional service. I offer professional services. Now, we may prepare what we call survey deliverables or mapping deliverables as part of that professional service, but I am selling a professional service. I'm not selling maps. I'm not selling products. And so I didn't do a good job early on with RH and just weeding out those people. Okay, I'm at almost 45 minutes, so I want to wrap this up. I end up splitting this into 2 episodes, but to finish off, I just want to talk about the 6 factors that contribute to the cost of proposals. I know many of you listening to this episode already know this, but there may be some young surveyors and project managers that don't fully understand the costs that go into a proposal, so I want to talk about that. So I have 6. The first one is just preparing qualifications. Usually you do that if you're working for a government agency. I don't do that as much for private companies. Sometimes larger private companies will ask for like a company resume or a company profile, but it's fairly rare. So preparing qualifications, usually for government work, that can be a substantial cost. That's things like resumes, company profiles, project history, available bandwidth, resumes of key staff, org charts, project approaches, all that stuff. There's research that could be, boundary research of land use regulations, land development regulations. It could be research of standards and specifications. It could be, review of civil engineering plans or conceptual design sketches. Then there's needs discovery and scope of services development. So that's where in that element of business development, you are working to really understand what the client is trying to do and help them balance the trade-offs between speed and cost and risk and cost and uncertainty and cost, and craft an approach that finds the right balance and meets their needs and is cost effective. And then taking once you've discovered their needs and understand their risk tolerance and some other things about them, and you determine an approach, then you can craft a scope of services. We need to do a PYB-OTM about those 3 steps: needs discovery, determining a project approach, and then crafting a scope based on that. So there's that cost. Then there's the actual preparing the fee estimate, getting into Microsoft Excel or whatever tool you use and actually figuring out, what is this going to cost? Can we be profitable? Sometimes there's scheduling. That could be as simple as a sentence in your scope of services, or it could be a detail sometimes on bigger, more complicated projects. You have to prepare detailed schedules. That takes time. There's a cost to it. I'd like to do another PYB-OTM Extra where we just look at some examples of what it costs to prepare a proposal or a statement of qualifications. I'll try and remember to do one for a small project and do one for a big project. What I will say here is those projects are not insignificant. I think we'll talk a little bit later about how you can, in the next part of this episode, how you can reduce and control your proposal costs, how you can be more productive. But I will tell you, even an informal email proposal probably costs me $250, $250 to $500, let's say, if it's just an hour or two of my time. By the time I take the phone call or read the email and do a little bit of very minimal research and put together an email proposal, we're probably into that thing $500, could be $1,000. And I would say to actually prepare a formal scope of services, a cover letter, our standard agreement, and actually get a formal proposal to get a client under contract, even without any qualification stuff, it's $2,000. Every proposal I get to that point in this business costs me $2,000 in staff time, no matter what I do. I don't think it's ever less than that. So those costs are significant. So we'll try and do a PYBO Team Extra. I'm way behind on those, but I am going to do some, and we'll do some napkin math on the whiteboard, and we'll look at a shop like mine. What do proposals actually cost you? Okay. I'm about 45 or 50 minutes there. I try and keep these things between 45 minutes and an hour, these episodes. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you. What are we going to do in part 2? Part 2, we will talk about how you actually reduce your proposal costs. I'll give you some tips for that. If you're not giving away free advice or free proposals, how do you demonstrate your expertise? Because you still need to do that. That's an important part of marketing and business development. I'll share some suggestions. We'll talk about how you avoid those mistakes I made early in the business. Remember, I gave you the 2 big mistakes: giving away too much free advice and preparing too many proposals for unqualified leads. Talk about how can you avoid that. And then finally, we'll conclude with what are some analytics you might want to run to just track proposal costs and evaluate whether you're spending money on the right. Are you effectively spending your business development money and resources? So we'll look at that. We can easily do a whole episode on that. So that will be the next episode. And then following that, part 2 on this topic, a friend of mine, Kyle, asked me if I would do an episode about hiring a diverse team for your survey business, which I know can be a challenge in surveying. We tend to be, kind of crusty old white guys that like being outside and don't like people very much. That's not a good model for the future. So I think it was a great topic that Kyle asked me to speak about. And so I'm going to do a whole episode on that for him. We'll do that after we do part 2 of this episode. We're going to hear from our sponsor, then have a little bit of housekeeping to do here at the end. And then we'll in a week, you guys will be able to listen to part 2.